Two. Well, hey, welcome everyone to another Foundations of Mindfulness with Amy Schoenhoff. Obviously, hey, Mike Kenny, Words to Scent, and Amy, Mindfulness in the Heartland. So this is, I think, what webinar, is it 2 or 3?
We're on 3. We have one more after tonight.
That's right. Yes. And yeah, well, not to belabor it, because I think we have the same crew that we had last time. So you are all familiar with the format. This is going to be actually, I think, pretty intimate because there's so few people. So my thoughts are unmute yourselves and address Amy directly if you've got any questions, or, if you so desire, you can do it either via the questions tab or the chat tab, whatever you desire. So with that said, I will hand it over to Amy and we will commence the class. We're glad to have you guys. I hope you're getting something out of it.
Yes, thank you all for being here this evening and for your continued commitment to show up. So I think I'll start by sharing my screen here and getting into my presentation mode. So hopefully you can see my screen now. And the first thing I wanted to cover in our time this evening, what I'm hoping, if you'll remember, for those of you who were here last week, which it sounds like most or if not all of you were, remember one of the things I asked you to potentially complete this past week was what was referred to as the 9-dot exercise. And the practice was to, with 4 lines, draw a line through each one of the dots without lifting your pen and without going backwards. The assignment wasn't necessarily about completing or finding the solution for this challenge, but being present for like the full process of engagement with it. So I just wanted to open the floor to see if anybody had a chance to work with the 9-dot exercise, and if you were willing to share your well, let's start with this. Did anybody find a solution for the 9-dot exercise?
Yes, I did, but I've done it before.
You have done it before. Okay. Did anybody else work with the 9-dot this past week?
I played with it for a little bit, but I got frustrated and walked away.
Okay, that's fine. So I think what I'll do is I'll show you the solution. This is the solution I've seen most frequently. I have seen people come up with other solutions, but I'll show you the one that I see most of the time. And I will say some of the other solutions I've seen are really creative and kind of out of the box. But this is the solution for the, oh goodness, this is the solution for the 9-dot exercise. And so the gentleman who spoke up and said that he had done it before, is this the solution you found as well? Or that you came to as well? Yes, okay.
It's the same one that I remembered, yes.
Yes, okay. So what you might notice is, as you look at this solution, is that, and this is the point that often tricks people up in finding the solution, is that to solve it, you really have to get outside of the visual box that's created by the 9 dots. So as you'll see, the lines have to fall outside of the box to be able to capture all of the dots with the solution that's presented. And there's a couple of things that we can talk about in relationship to doing this exercise. The other gentleman who had mentioned working with it talked about being challenged by it or being frustrated by it, and that's not an uncommon response. But one of the things we can learn by working with this exercise is it truly is a challenge, and we can look at all of kind of our points of contact with it from the moment we pick it up, the time we spend with it, and whenever we decide to put it down, that we're kind of learning a little bit about how we might work with challenge. and how we might work with not finding a solution, because this can really be applicable to our daily lives, right? Oftentimes we're met with challenges in our lives that don't appear to have immediate solutions, but oftentimes it's the frameworks that we're, the perceptual lenses that we're bringing into the challenge that sometimes limits our ability to see the solution, right? So I would be interested if anybody is willing to share what it was like to work with the challenge. Like, what did you notice? I heard one person say they noticed feeling frustration. Are there any other things that you might have noticed as you worked with the 9-dot exercise that you'd be willing to share with the group? Okay, well, I'm going to take that as no in terms of people wanting to talk more about it. But it's just the purpose of the exercise is just an opportunity to look at how we approach it, how we approach this challenge, how we work with it, what shows up while we're working with it, and when we choose to put it down. And just really looking at that, and just in terms of how we're relating to this challenge and how that might be applicable to kind of other areas of our lives and other challenges that we may face. And in addition to that, the recognition that sometimes it's how we're approaching a problem and the lenses that we're looking through that will often determine our ability to solve the problem, and I think I might have brought this up last week. There's this, oftentimes when we really get caught up in the thinking mind, really paying attention to our thought processes and trying to problem solve, sometimes we can kind of get stuck in loops of thought that don't get us any closer to the solution. But sometimes we have these experiences when we can kind of let go of having an answer. Like, for example, if you've ever had the experience of having a problem that you just can't solve, and then you get up and go for a walk, and then as you're walking, not thinking about the problem at all, another solution might present itself that wasn't there before. That sometimes it requires for us to find solutions. Sometimes it requires, in a sense, a letting go. A letting go of the problem. And then that kind of creates space for solutions to arise that maybe we wouldn't have found otherwise. And this is an example of kind of metaphorically how that can show up. That when we can get out of the box that we spend our time living in and we can just let go sometimes, it's then that solutions can present themselves that may lie outside of how we're orienting towards a problem. Are there any questions or observations about that?
Yeah, just one observation, and that is that we're all trained to think generally in a certain way and look at problems in a certain way. And what we're lacking, I think, is that sense of imagination, of looking outside of what our experience is and imagining something different. You talk about letting go of the problem, that's one way, but the other way is kind of open your mind up and think about maybe some crazy things, some brainstorming things, a mind melding kind of thing. And sometimes the solution is inside there.
Right. These ways that we get outside of the box, right? And I think we can see a lot of that right now, actually, with this COVID-19. People are coming up with really creative strategies and solutions that are presenting themselves only because we have a problem that needs to be solved, right? And that's actually, it's a really interesting way to look at challenge, that sometimes we shrink in the face of challenge. But many times, if we can reorient towards challenge, they can become spaces of thriving. That we can, through challenge, learn a great deal about ourselves, about our capacities. There's this great quote, and I think I might have it in my notes this evening. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I don't have it. I'll see if I can bring it with me next week. But it's this idea that if we feel threatened, as human beings, our tendency is to shrink. But if we orient towards things as challenges, then, we can orient towards more of a sense of growth and what we're capable of, that we can meet it with resilience. And sometimes, especially like right now, we're seeing a lot of creative thinking because we're being forced to, we're being forced outside of our comfort zone. So challenge is not necessarily a bad thing. Thank you very much for sharing.
I was going to say though, I'm sometimes a glass half empty kind of guy. And so as much as I see the innovation and I see that kind of thinking, I'm also seeing a lot of people who are stuck in a way of thinking that is well behind the experience that we're having right now.
Yeah.
And the old ways of doing business aren't necessarily the ways that they're going to get us ahead. So part of it's getting yourself unstuck, but then getting the people around you, perhaps, that you can, within the 3-meter sphere that you can touch, to reach out and to get them to change too.
Yes, right. Adaptability, right? It's a great skill set to have, and it is learnable. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Anybody else have anything they want to share before we move forward? Okay. Well, we're going to move on now. Our practice tonight is going to be observing thoughts and feelings. So that's going to be our meditation practice this evening. And I do just want to remind everybody about the window of tolerance. Make sure that as we're going through our practice this evening, that you're self-monitoring the level of arousal in your nervous system and making adjustments if you need to. Eyes open or closed, bringing some simple movement into the practice if you need to, taking time to orient yourself in the room that you're in. Whatever you need to do to support yourself, please feel like you're free to do so, okay, as we practice together. So I just want to remind you of that. So I'm going to turn my camera off. Hold on. So I'll get us started on this practice. I want you guys to get yourselves into a comfortable seated or lying down position, whatever's going to serve you best. And we'll probably work with this meditation for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll open up to discussion. And once again, I have my chimes with me, so you'll hear these at the beginning and at the end of the meditation, just to let you know when we're beginning and ending. So just taking a few moments to begin by settling into the body as a whole. Sitting here or lying down here, breathing. Riding the waves of the breath, moment by moment. Resting in awareness. And just allowing the entirety of the body and the breath to express themselves. Being here with life unfolding here and now in this body. Just riding the waves of the breath moment by moment. And when you're ready, if you care to, letting go of the breath and the body as a whole and allowing those to drop into the background of your awareness. Still present, but just less featured. And we'll begin to invite the domain of thoughts, feelings, and mood states to the center stage of our field of awareness. For a time, we're going to be attending to the stream of thought rather than being carried away by the content or emotional charge of our thoughts. Instead, imagining ourselves resting comfortably on the bank of a stream full of thoughts coming and going, allowing our individual thoughts, if and when they arise, to be seen and felt, recognized, knowing that they are thoughts and just events, mental events, passing through. Seeing our thoughts as emergences of the thinking mind. Seeing them as independent, being aware of their content and any potential emotional charges that are present without being hooked by them. Perhaps orienting to these fleeting thoughts as bubbles or eddies or currents within the stream that flows in front of us. Not seeing them as facts or truth, just thoughts. Whatever their emotional charge or their urgency or their tendency to reappear, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Seeing if it's possible to allow these thoughts to arise, linger, and dissolve back into the stream. Relating to their content with a sense of neutrality. Even if a thought is particularly compelling, and perhaps especially if it's particularly compelling, seeing if it's possible to just let it go. So for now, allowing thoughts to come and go, sounds to come and go, sensations to come and go. Not pursuing any of these things. Just resting in awareness and the spaces between thoughts. Moment by moment and breath by breath as we sit here or lie here. You may find it helpful as you sit on the bank of this stream or river of thoughts to be especially sensitive to the commentary or advice you may be giving yourself as you sit here. Or perhaps noticing a storyline that emerges and just recognizing that this is a form of scaffolding that begins to take a position in relationship to the thoughts that we're having and their accompanying feeling states. And just recognize that this commentary or storyline is just more thinking and judging, and just seeing if you can let these go as well. Just attending as best you can to each mental event as it arises, without being pulled into the past or the future, or opinions, desires. Just simply seeing and knowing each of these things as they pass through, not as the truth. And not giving them the space to proliferate endlessly as they often do. Watching them emerge and dissolve. You may notice how easily thoughts manufacture themselves, how they blossom and proliferate, whether they're views or opinions, ideas, plans, memories, stories. They proliferate and grow as we give them our attention. We get hooked by them. And then suddenly we may find ourselves in the stream of thought, floating down the stream of thought, carried away. And we just simply notice this, pull ourselves back up onto the banks, and begin once again attending to this stream of thinking and feeling. Over and over again, just coming back to the bank of the stream. Allowing it all to be held in bare awareness, bare attention, moment by moment, breath by breath. And as we sit or lie here resting in this awareness, knowing thoughts as thoughts and feelings as feelings, and working with accepting all of these things as they come and go, whatever their emotional charge, we can use this as an experiment in cultivating greater intimacy with ourselves, of knowing our own internal world, and just simply being with what's on our heart and mind in this moment. Allowing it all to come and go, and allowing ourselves to be as we are. Perhaps seeing all these thoughts and feelings more impersonally, as ripples on the surface of a body of water that has much greater depth. As eddies and currents on a mind that is much bigger than thought, bigger than any feeling. Knowing that we don't need to be imprisoned by any of these things. That we can actually learn through observation about ourselves, our mental habits. So for the remainder of our time together, until you hear the sound of the chimes, just allowing for the arising and passing away. Bringing yourself back to the banks. If you find yourself carried away by any particular thought or feeling. Noticing internal commentary and recognizing that as thought as well. And letting it all just come and go to whatever degree they do. Moment by moment and breath by breath. And as you're ready to do so, opening your eyes, perhaps taking a moment to just orient yourself to the room that you're in. So let's just take a minute to discuss that practice. See what that was like for you all. So just open up the floor for whoever wants to share. Oh, I think I'm unmuting everybody here. I think I am. You may have, can you unmute yourselves?
There, that got me on mute.
Okay. Whoever wants to share here.
You know, for me, when we first started, you said, don't get hooked by the thoughts. And that's always something that is challenging for me. And in my meditation practice, that's something that always gets me is the thought. And so I remember thinking at the beginning, I'm like, yeah, okay, let's, how are we going to not get hooked? And I liked how you gave the vision of sitting on the side of a stream, and that gave me something to focus on in a way that I haven't heard it before, and it really actually worked very well for me. So thank you for that.
Sure. And I just want to enforce to you that that's what you experience in terms of that mental drifting is very normal and natural. You know, it's like we've talked about with the breath as a focal point of awareness. It's just that recognition that we've, you know, been carried away and bringing ourselves back. And I'm glad that that imagery works for you. Another image that people can work with regard to thoughts and feelings is clouds, like the idea of clouds just floating through the sky and orienting to thoughts being like those clouds in the sky, that we can just allow them to pass by. And that is, you know, that takes practice. It's not something that comes necessarily readily to people, but it's something we can gain more skillfulness with, and especially that recognition that we've been hooked, you know. The other thing I wanted to mention too is noticing what hooks you. You know, this is where we can learn about our mental habits. Like, you know, we've all got things that are particularly sticky for us. You know, some thoughts really stick, whereas others don't. You know, some thoughts just kind of slide right off and we can let them go. But some thoughts really stick and they're really good at hooking us. So one thing we can start to notice in that hooking, so it's not just getting hooked and, you know, being upset that you're getting hooked, it's noticing like what is hooking me, you know, that we can bring awareness to what it is that is really sticky for us personally, because we all have our own kind of sticky spots, and that can be useful information, you know, that we can learn about ourselves through this process of getting hooked and getting unhooked, and recognizing too, like that we can decouple from these thoughts. We don't have to be so, they don't have to control us as much as we thought perhaps in the past that they had. You know, they don't have as much power as we often give them. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share about that practice and what it was like for you?
I knew about the thoughts, but this time I also observed my feelings. And mostly it's about thought for me, but some of those thoughts lead to feelings. And what I took away is from this exercise, I can do the same thing on the feelings.
Exactly. Yep, you nailed it. Exactly. That these things are often coupled together. Thoughts are usually have an emotional charge, and often we'll feel an emotional charge and thoughts will arise, right? These things are partnered many times in our experiences. That's a great observation. Great observation. And what we're learning as we, you know, work with these things, like basically we're starting to kind of pull these things apart. You know, we're starting to pull thought apart from emotion and bodily sensation, that we're realizing that these things, we're often living them all together at once, but they're actually separate things. You know, that these thoughts are here and feelings are here and bodily sensations are here. And as we're able to kind of pull them apart, you know, we can see that they come and go, you know, that we actually get some agency over them by being aware that it's not just this kind of blob of experience, that there's actually different things happening. You know, conditions are coming together to create an experience, and we can start to kind of unravel them in a sense and get some agency over them through this awareness. Like, we can't do any of this without awareness. That's the beauty of mindfulness, is that we're learning to have an awareness over these things that are often just enmeshed with one another, and they're actually a conglomeration of different things happening. So I'm really glad you were able to see that thoughts and feelings are often coupled together, right? And they create a bodily experience. Like, how do you know what sadness feels like? It's because you have a bodily experience that tells you, I'm feeling sadness, right? So like, what does that feel like in my body? What does anger feel like in my body? Where do I notice it? These are all points of awareness for us. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else want to share? Great insights. These are wonderful insights. It tells me that you're definitely cultivating some awareness, and I hope you can see that yourselves. This particular thoughts and feelings can be particularly challenging to work with because we have so many of them. You know, thoughts are just, they proliferate. You know, they really do proliferate, and we can be caught in the stream before we even realize it. You know, we can just be brought downstream in a matter of moments. So I'm glad you were able to work with that exercise, and you'll have a MP3 file, I believe, this week to do that, to a recording of this same meditation to work with. I hope you'll continue to work with it.
Now, Amy, with that, the MP3, for some reason, let me pull it up. So it took me to your website, and it said you were like out of bandwidth. So the 2 other files are in the handouts for those that are online. Okay. But what I usually do is have URL to the MP3, and I couldn't pull it up. So I'll have to send that out later.
Well, that's unfortunate. That I'll have to look into that. Okay.
Yeah, send me a new link, and I can send that out in the same fashion I used to, just a URL to the MP3. So.
Okay. Well, I will look into that. That's no good. Okay. Well, let me get back into presentation mode here. I'm going to turn off my camera because you guys don't need to be looking at my mug. This is what I want you looking at. Okay. So let's talk a little bit tonight about stress. And I really love this image for many reasons. But, you know, like the thing I immediately react to when I see this picture is like, if that were me, that would not be my reaction to having a bunch of bees sitting on my chest and neck. And the fact that this guy is smiling and seems to be kind of enjoying what's happening, if that could be possible, I think it speaks to the fact that stress is really not, and when I'm talking about stress here, I'm not talking about like life and death stress. I'm talking about daily stress, the stress we experience in daily life. That stress is really a relationship that we have with what's happening. It has to do, it's a particular relationship we have with the environment that we appraise as potentially exceeding our resources. You know, we have a sense of feeling endangered, like physical threat, but not only physical threat. You know, threats can be threats of a potential loss of integrity, you know, or a threat to our sense of self, like a response in terms of feeling our egos being threatened. It could be threats to our social standing. That threats aren't necessarily physical in nature, that we can feel threatened by lots of things. But the fact is our relationship with stress has a lot to do with how we are appraising what's happening and how we are appraising our ability to deal with it. So there's a sense of stress being a transaction, and that a great deal of it has to do with our perceptions. Hold on here. And that our stress responses are in response to this appraisal that we're making. And it's going to be very individuated. It's going to be very different for each of us and very personalized. So this image here, this is called the stress response or stress reactivity stress response, this diagram is. And we're not going to get all into the nitty-gritty of it tonight because there's a lot here, but I just want to point to a few things in this chart. You know, one is the fact that, you know, every one of us has a nervous system. You know, we have the autonomic nervous system that manages a lot of the things that happen unconsciously in our bodies. You know, it manages our heart beating. You know, we don't have to tell our heart to beat, it knows to beat. We don't have to tell ourselves to breathe. You know, these are functions of the autonomic nervous system. And this autonomic nervous system is dealing with a lot of functions of the body that we play no conscious role in. And one branch of this autonomic nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system. And that sympathetic nervous system is the one that creates the alarm response of the stress reaction. And the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest portion of the nervous system, plays a small role as well, but the primary kind of mover and shaker of our stress response comes from the sympathetic nervous system. And when the fight or flight response is activated, that has a cascade effect on our cardiovascular system, our musculoskeletal system, our immune system. You know, the whole body responds to stress. And stress, what makes us unique as human beings is we can create stress through our thought processes. That the mental processes that we have going on can actually generate stress without anything external happening. And you may have some familiarity with that, you know, where we kind of work ourselves up to a stress response, but there's because of things we may worry about having happening in the future, or perhaps thinking about things that have happened in the past that kind of trigger us and get us into this hyper arousal mode. So it doesn't even need to be a threat in the external environment. We as human beings have this really kind of unique capacity, I would say, to create stress for ourselves through our cognition. And our perception, you know, we talked about perception last week. You know, our perception can play a key role in generating our stress responses, and not only generating them, but how we respond to them. Now, we don't always have the option of fight or flight or freeze. You know, sometimes we have to continue to function even though we're in the state of hyperarousal. You know, for example, if you're at work and in a meeting and you get triggered and you have a stress response, you can't necessarily get into a knock-em sock-em with whoever upset you in the meeting. Nor can you just necessarily walk out of a meeting either. You know, there are times where we have to really, even though we may be experiencing fight or flight, that we still have to be able to function and manage ourselves. And a lot of times what many of us do to manage our stress is that we internalize with our stress. So we really drop it back down into our bodies. And over time, those things can create issues for ourselves that they, you know, if we're not effectively mobilizing ourselves and working the stress out of our bodies, we can actually create over time things like sleep disorders. You know, we can experience headaches, migraines, backaches, anxiety, high blood pressure. You know, there's lots of physical symptomology that can start to show up when we're not able to effectively discharge our stress. And likewise, many times what people will move into is what we refer to as maladaptive coping. So we may do things like drink too much alcohol or smoke cigarettes or eat too much food as ways of trying to wind our nervous systems down. You know, we may also distract ourselves. We may, you know, use substances to try to get our nervous system back into a state of a balanced sense of arousal. But those things as well can also lead to breakdown over time, right? They can create issues for us over time. And the other thing that when we're utilizing maladaptive coping is that we're not really learning and growing. We're not really working with the stress. And that's not, and many of us don't get good coping skills. Many of us aren't taught in our upbringing how to effectively manage stress. So it's not surprising that we lean into maladaptive ways of coping that may not serve us, but we still do have choice. And as we inform and educate ourselves, we can relearn how to manage our stress. And the role that mindfulness can play in this is really helping us to recognize stress, to start to, through this awareness of what's happening in our body, what's happening in our thought processes and in our emotions, being able to have awareness around these things, we can start to recognize when stress is arising, right? And then through that awareness, we can start to insert new ways of coping with it. We can have, we can start to change how we respond. We can start to identify new ways of managing stress. But the first thing we need to do is recognize that stress is present. And even just in that recognition, that we're experiencing stress, we've already changed what's happening. When we're feeling fight or flight and we're not even aware of it, and we're just moving into means of coping that aren't skillful, there's no awareness around that. But when we can bring in awareness, we can start to slowly shift our responses so that we're becoming more skillful over time in managing these challenges that we face. So that's my presentation. Does anybody have any questions about that? Or if you want to share any of your own challenges with stress or talk about that at all, I'm happy to have a conversation as well.
And so for me, stress has always been, I've never dealt with it well, we'll say. And all of the maladaptive coping that you put up there is pretty much how I've lived my entire life, really. My story is started as a kid. I was molested when I was 4, and then I was a police officer for 9 years here locally. So I've never really had coping skills. I've never really had ways of dealing with it. So for me, being able to identify that I am stressed, and then you had on the side there emotional based strategies, problem based strategies, I think is what they said. Those are what makes me curious, is how do you do that, as opposed to eating too much or drinking too much, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
And
that's the struggle I have.
I'm sorry?
I said that's the struggle I have, is how do you develop, or what are acceptable coping mechanisms now?
Yeah. And that's a process. That's a process. I had similar challenges as a young adult. And mindfulness has played a key role in helping me identify those things that work for me. And it's this idea of, and I know it probably sounds hokey, but there's just, for me, there has been so much richness in the experience of befriending myself. Like really looking at this as this whole process of greater awareness as just getting to know myself and bringing curiosity to the experience, and then trying different things and figuring out what works for me. Like understanding I have this nervous system. It is informed by my history, the things I have experienced. These things are kind of woven into me to some extent. And so over time, I'm kind of unweaving these maladaptive coping mechanisms, and I'm learning how to soothe my nervous system in ways that are nourishing and wholesome, that aren't so destructive. and actually that actually helped me to resolve the stress. So one example is exercise. Exercise is a great way to get the cortisol out of our bodies when we experience stress. It's also a great way to self-regulate. So that's like one thing, like figuring out like what physical thing I can do for myself that feels nourishing to me. And that's going to look different for all of us, you know, and it's just figuring out what I'm going to be my own best friend. I am going to endeavor to understand this life I've been given, these experiences I've been given, and I'm going to be of service to myself and the world by taking care of me. And it's just a process. And sometimes it is frustrating. But I encourage you to just keep coming back to yourself. You know, it's like I don't identify myself as Christian, but I have always loved the story of the prodigal son. You know, the prodigal son returns after being out and just kind of making a mess of his life, and he comes home and dad's really happy to see him. Dad's happy to see his son. And that's how we can be in relationship to ourselves when perhaps we're not living up to our own expectations of what we should be doing. You know, that we can just invite ourselves back home, open the door, say, I'm just really glad you're here and not out there.
I like to look at that story that parable from a different perspective, and that's not the prodigal son, but the forgiving father.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot to be learned, I think, from that. But what I was thinking is, as I'm listening to you, one of the things that I try to do, especially if I'm in a workplace setting or a group setting or whatever else, where I've built some relationships, is have a trusted agent. And when I get a stress response and I go to the basement, okay, which is a place that you go where you shouldn't make decisions, okay, because your mind's not ready for decisions. Somebody looks at me and says, hey, Mike, you're in a basement. You need to take a break. And because sometimes you can't even see it yourself because you're in the middle of it. So as much as this is about, I think, about self-awareness, it's also about having a battle buddy or a trusted agent or someone who can look at you and say, hey, you know, it's time. You're in a basement. Take a break. Don't make a decision yet. Come back in a bit, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Community is really important. Yes. Having a tribe. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I encourage you to be on this journey to just keep meeting yourself and greeting yourself at the door, you know, and stay committed to yourself. I mean, I just think it's really important that we stop abandoning ourselves. We make a commitment to stop abandoning ourselves. Any other thoughts? Things people want to share? So great insights. All right. Oh, one other thing. Okay, so I'll get this MP3 recording figured out, and if you want to work with that this next week, that would be great. The other thing I'm going to invite you guys to do, and there's more information in your packet that's attached here, is to try to eat one meal mindfully this next week. And there's some instructions on that in the packet. But the idea is to bring awareness to your hunger, to the foods that you choose, paying attention to where your food comes from. Like, you know, how did this food get in front of me? Considering all the pieces that brought your food in front of you, noticing what it looks like, its smells, its tastes, and really slowing down to savor one meal. And if you can't get a whole meal in mindfully, then one bite or your first 3 bites. Just really slowing down to appreciate and savor your food and notice what that's like for you. So that's another practice I want to give you the opportunity to work with this next week, and we'll talk about that when we convene for our final week, which is next week. And we will be talking about the heart-based practices of mindfulness. So that's all I've got for this evening, unless there are more questions or observations people want to share. Okay. Well, I wish you all a wonderful week ahead. I do hope you will take some time to work with the MP3 file once you have it, and to enjoy at least one mindful meal. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great evening and a great week ahead.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing everyone. Amy, thanks so much,
Thanks,
as always.
Thank
Cindy.
you.